He grabbed my waist so fast it knocked the breath right out of me, pressing me against the hood of his car. Cold, wet from the rain. And before I could react, his mouth was already on mine. This wasn't a soft kiss or some awkward moment we could later blame on wine or exhaustion. No, it was real, raw, hungry. A kiss that came with heat and force and something fierce behind it that hit me straight in the gut. His tongue pushed past my lips like he knew exactly what he was doing. And I didn't push him away. I didn't even hesitate. I clutched the collar of his shirt like it might keep me standing, like it might hold the world in place. I don't know how long it lasted. 10 seconds, maybe a minute. Time gets slippery in moments like that, either collapsing into one heartbeat or stretching endlessly. When I finally pulled away, I did it fast, heart hammering, breath caught in my throat. His hands were still gripping my sides, steady, firm, grounding me, and I stood there shaking, not from fear or the rain, but from something deeper, something that had been asleep in me for far too long and was suddenly, violently, wide awake. I whispered, "We can't." But even as I said it, my lips still burned from his. I could feel the heat radiating off my skin. He looked right into my eyes, calm, composed, and said with maddening clarity, "But you didn't stop me." And he was right. We both knew it. I stood there frozen, my hands braced against the car like they might hold me up. He stepped back, opened his door, and without saying another word, he got in and drove away. Just like that. Gone. The sound of the door slamming, the engine fading, it all felt so final. But my body hadn't caught up. My cheeks were burning. My legs were jelly. My fingers still remembered the shape of his shoulders, and my chest rose and fell like I'd been running full speed through something I couldn't name. The night swallowed him, and I watched those taillights disappear, knowing deep down I'd just crossed a line there'd be no coming back from. That moment wasn't just a mistake, and it sure as hell wasn't innocent. It was a break, a fracture in the middle of a life that had grown too clean, too still, too numb. It was something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Not because I couldn't, but because I'd stopped believing I was still allowed to. But tonight, my body had decided otherwise. That kiss pulled something primal out of me, something that terrified me more than anything I'd felt in a long time. I drove home on autopilot. I barely saw the road, barely registered the lights or the blur of the highway. All I could hear was my own breath and the echo of that moment. How right it had felt. How dangerous it had been. I kept asking myself the same thing. Was this the moment everything started to fall apart? Or the first moment I truly woke up? When I got home, I tiptoed through the house like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. My husband was asleep. Of course he was. I took off my heels, stood in the hallway with rain still dripping from my hair, and just listened. The silence was so thick it hurt. I could have gone to bed. I could have slipped under the covers and let the night disappear like nothing happened. But I didn't want to. I couldn't. That kiss was still buzzing in my veins like something electric, and I wasn't ready to let it go. I stood in our bedroom doorway, watching him sleep. A man I'd shared a life with, a house, a history. But right then, he felt like a stranger. He hadn't touched me in weeks, maybe months. And even if I told him what had just happened, even if I laid it all out, detail by detail, I honestly don't think he would have noticed anything had changed. And that was the part that made me ache. I turned away, walked down the hall, poured myself a glass of wine, and stared out the window while the rain kept whispering against the glass like it knew exactly what I'd done. I sat at the table, legs crossed, hair still wet, and let my mind drift back. Not to the kiss itself, but to what led me there. Because the truth is, this didn't start tonight. That kiss didn't just happen. That moment at the car, the way he looked at me, the heat between us. It wasn't born out of nothing. It started 2 weeks ago. When Inga offered me the game, by the time Inga poured our second glass of wine, I'd already told her more than I planned to. Though in truth, I think she'd seen it on my face the moment I walked into the spa. It wasn't just exhaustion, though that was there too. A heaviness in my posture and a certain dryness in the way I smiled, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes and hasn't for months, maybe even years. It was the slow leak of something deeper, the kind of tired that doesn't go away after a nap or a vacation, the kind that makes you forget what it ever felt like to be wanted or seen or even remotely exciting. Sitting in that oversized lounge chair, wrapped in a soft white robe with steam rising all around us, I felt like a woman play acting at relaxation. My body was present, but my mind kept drifting, tugging at the frayed edges of memories I couldn't quite place. Dinners eaten in silence, beds shared with polite detachment, anniversaries celebrated like business meetings. My marriage to Igor had become a beautifully curated arrangement, tidy and respectable and hollow in ways I didn't dare admit aloud. The intimacy was gone. Not just physical, though that had faded so gradually I hardly noticed until it was simply absent, but emotional, spiritual, everything that once made us feel like we belonged to each other. Inga, on the other hand, the woman, was a vision of unbothered sensuality, leaning back in her chair with the kind of ease only a woman fully in control of her life could display. Her legs were perfectly smooth, her nails impeccably painted, and when she crossed one ankle over the other, she did it like a woman who knew exactly how to hold an audience, even if it was just me. There was always something theatrical about her, something a little too polished, but not in a fake way. In the way of someone who'd long since accepted that power and beauty weren't gifts, but tools. "You're bored," she said suddenly, not as a question, but a fact delivered with the same breezy confidence as if she were commenting on the weather. "Bored and starved," I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't argue with it. And for a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. Just one more round of sharp-edged honesty between friends. But then she tilted her head, swirling the wine in her glass like she was weighing a thought that might cross a line. "You know," she said, her voice low and casual, "maybe you should try my husband." I blinked. Sure, I'd misheard her, but she didn't flinch or laugh or clarify. She just sipped her wine and looked at me with those wide, knowing eyes of hers, the ones that never missed a crack in a foundation. I let out a short laugh, sharp and automatic. "Excuse me?" She shrugged, setting her glass down gently. "I'm not joking. You're miserable and he's very good at reminding women they're still women. You need something to shake you loose." For a moment, I thought it was just another one of Inga's wild, inappropriate ideas, the kind she tossed out at brunch for shock value. But the look in her eyes was steady and clear, and it chilled me more than I cared to admit, because part of me didn't want to reject it outright. Not because I seriously considered it, not yet, but because the idea itself awakened something that had been dormant for too long. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice like we were swapping secrets. "There's this thing, a kind of transfer, a redirection of desire. You don't have to fall in love, you don't even have to act on it. Sometimes just allowing yourself to want someone else reminds you that you're alive." I shook my head, trying to dismiss it with a smile. "I'm not that kind of woman." Inga smirked, the corners of her mouth curling with something close to pity. "That's what every woman says right before she remembers she's not dead." That night, back home, I replayed the conversation 100 times, and each time it landed differently. I told myself it was a joke, something to forget. But my brain wouldn't cooperate. I kept seeing the way Inga talked about Oleg, the heat in her voice, the satisfaction in her posture, the way she said he reminds women they're still women, like it was some kind of gift he carried in his hands, ready to offer to whomever needed it most. And despite myself, despite every instinct honed by years of moral muscle memory, I started to picture him. Not in a sexual way, at least not at first. I just remembered the way he looked at people, that slow and deliberate gaze that seemed to take in more than what was on the surface. I remembered his voice. Low, calm, always with a trace of amusement, like he was permanently in on some private joke. And then I imagined his hands, not on me exactly, but near, just enough to feel the warmth they'd bring, the way they might move with confidence and care and a kind of certainty I hadn't felt in longer than I cared to admit. I went to bed restless that night, the kind of restless that starts under the skin and builds behind your eyes, like something is about to change, but you don't know what yet. My husband lay beside me, already asleep, his body turned away, his breathing even. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I didn't feel anything anymore. Not warmth, not guilt, not even confusion. And then it happened. It was the smallest thing. So small, really, that on another day I might not have even noticed. We were leaving a dinner, a group thing with mutual friends, and as I reached for my coat, Oleg stepped forward and held it open for me. His hand brushed mine. Not in a dramatic way, not intentional. But the contact sparked something sharp and unignorable, and I felt it all through me. A jolt, a shift, a flutter that started low in my stomach and bloomed outward, wild and immediate and completely uninvited. I looked up at him then, just for a second. And the moment our eyes met, something inside me tightened. I saw it. I know I did. The same flicker of heat I felt, mirrored in him. He said nothing. Neither did I. But we both knew something had started. Quiet and slow and steady, like a fuse waiting to burn down. It started small. So small I could almost pretend it was nothing. And at first, I told myself that's all it was. Nothing. A glance that lingered just a beat longer than polite conversation required. The slight tilt of his head when I spoke. The way his eyes didn't flick away when I caught him watching me from across the room. The kind of moments that are easy to explain away when you want to. But then his voice changed. Not the words he used, which were always appropriate, careful, measured. But the way he said them, quieter and slower, as though each syllable was dipped in intention, as if even his pauses were designed to hold my attention a little longer than necessary. The first time I felt it for real, not just imagined, not just curiosity, was at the dinner party Inga threw at their place the following weekend. Nothing fancy, just 8 people around a long wooden table, good food, too much wine, and a steady stream of inside jokes that made me feel like a guest in someone else's world. Inga played hostess with her usual flair, floating from one end of the table to the other like she was born to perform. And when I showed up, she kissed me on the cheek and whispered with a smirk, "You're sitting next to Oleg tonight. Don't worry, I made sure." I laughed it off because what else was I supposed to do? But something in her tone, playful, sharp, deliberate, made me uneasy in a way I couldn't quite name. The seat she picked put me between Oleg and the balcony doors, and from the moment I sat down, I could feel it again. The heat, the tension, the slow build of something that didn't yet have a name but was growing stronger with every glance. He didn't touch me, not even by accident. But the nearness of him, the way his shoulder almost grazed mine when he leaned forward to refill my glass. The scent of him, all clean soap and something darker beneath. It wrapped around me like smoke. At one point, when the conversation drifted to politics or property taxes or something equally dull, he leaned over just slightly, his lips close enough to my ear that I could feel the warmth of his breath as he said, "You're too quiet tonight." And maybe it was nothing, just a comment. But the way he said it, the soft rasp in his voice, the way his gaze dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second before returning to my eyes, I knew it wasn't nothing, and he knew I knew. Later, when the plates were cleared and the others were distracted with dessert and laughter in the kitchen, I stepped out onto the balcony for some air, hoping the cool night would ground me, shake something loose, quiet whatever was boiling beneath my skin. But seconds later, I heard the sliding door open behind me, and before I could turn, I felt him. Not touching me, but there, close enough to change the air between us, close enough that I stopped breathing. We stood in silence for a few seconds, and then he said it. His voice low, almost lazy, like he wasn't in a hurry for my answer. "Do you really think I don't notice the way you look at me?" I closed my eyes because I didn't have an answer, at least not one I could say out loud. His presence wasn't just physical. It filled the space around me, wrapping around my nerves, setting fire to the parts of me I thought I'd buried under years of control and routine. I turned slowly to face him. And when I did, I found him already watching me, his expression unreadable but undeniably charged. He didn't move closer, not exactly, but he leaned in just enough that I could feel him without being touched, his mouth so near mine that every word vibrated down my spine. "You're not running," he said softly, and something about the way he said it made me tremble. Maybe I should have stepped back. Maybe I should have ended it then and there. But I didn't. I leaned in, just an inch, then another. And before I could stop myself, my lips found his. I kissed him first. And he didn't hesitate. His mouth met mine with a force that shattered every scrap of caution I had left. His hand tangled in my hair, his other on my lower back pulling me toward him. And for a moment, the kiss was everything. Fire and silence and pressure and breathlessness. The kind of kiss that steals reason and replaces it with instinct. When his lips dropped to my neck, warm and unrelenting, I gasped. Not from fear or surprise, but from the weight of wanting something so badly it bordered on pain. I pulled away suddenly, pressing my palm against his chest to put space between us. Not because I didn't want him. God, I did. But because I was afraid of how much. Afraid of what that much want would make me capable of doing. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. He stepped back, nodded once, not as an apology, but as acknowledgement, and turned toward the door, leaving me out there in the dark with my heart slamming against my ribs and my breath still tangled in his name. I stood there trying to piece myself back together, trying to decide whether I should be ashamed or thrilled, when I happened to glance at the window above the kitchen. And there she was. Inga, watching, wine glass in hand, smile on her face. That smile was not one of shock or betrayal or even surprise. It was something else entirely. Something calculated and smooth and satisfied, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Like maybe she'd planned it from the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed with my phone on my chest, staring at the screen, opening the message app more times than I could count. I typed something vague, deleted it, then typed something more direct. I hesitated. I stared at the word send like it had the power to wreck my entire life. Eventually, at some hour I won't admit to, I gave in. I typed, "What happened on the balcony? Was that real?" The response came faster than it should have, like he'd been waiting. "Do you want the truth or do you want to feel it again?" And I swear, right then, in the dark of my room, with my husband asleep beside me and my heart still wrecked from the taste of someone else, I already knew the answer. It didn't start as a routine. Not at first. Not in any structured way that gave it rules or rhythm, but more like a wildfire that sparked and flared and demanded to spread. Until before I even realized what was happening, I found myself rearranging entire parts of my life just to make room for him. For us. For these desperate pockets of time that were carved out like stolen chapters no one else could read. We didn't meet in obvious places, never near home or anyone who might recognize us, but in hotels that felt like they'd been built just for people like us. Anonymous rooms with cheap art and dim lamps and sheets that smelled like bleach and surrender. And sometimes we met in my workshop, where the scent of paint and varnish clung to our skin as we lost ourselves on the same couch I used to nap on during long client calls. Once, we met in the empty guest house of a woman I was redesigning a garden for. She was out of town, and I had the keys, and that was all it took for me to turn a sunlit room full of unused furniture into a place I would never be able to see the same way again. The sex stopped being sex somewhere along the way. It became something hungrier, more brutal, more consuming. The kind of contact that wasn't about pleasure or release, but about survival. As if my body had forgotten how to exist without the weight of him on top of me, inside me, around me. He whispered things in my ear that my husband had never dared to speak out loud. Not even in our first years, when intimacy still had edges and teeth. Things that felt like confessions and commands and lullabies all at once. things that made my skin flush in places I didn't even know could feel heat. He knew how to say my name like a secret and a curse, but sometimes he didn't say my name at all, just held my jaw in his hand and made me look at him like he was the only real thing left in the world. I kept waiting for the guilt to arrive. The crushing, cold wave I'd been taught should come after doing something so wrong, but it never showed up. Not in the way I expected. What came instead was fear, but not of what we were doing, not of being caught or condemned or labeled. The fear was of losing it, of waking up one morning and finding it gone, of returning to a life where no one touched me like I mattered. No one looked at me like I was a living thing with blood and fire inside my veins. It terrified me how quickly I became someone who measured her own existence through bruises left on her thighs and the sound of his voice saying more like it was a prayer. And somehow, impossibly, Inga always seemed to know. Sometimes she called minutes after we'd left each other, asking something casual, something irrelevant, like whether I'd seen her favorite scarf or if I remembered the name of that restaurant in Prague. Her voice light and warm and thick with implication. Other times she sent pictures, not of us, never direct, never proof, but of hotel lobbies I'd just walked through, or of flowers arranged in the same way I'd placed them in my studio an hour earlier, or of a room that looked exactly like the one we'd just used, only empty, cold, too quiet, as if to say, I see you, without ever having to say the words out loud. And I didn't know whether she was playing a game with me or offering permission, whether she was testing me or protecting me, but either way she knew, and I hated how much of me needed her to know. At some point, I can't say exactly when. Oleg changed. Not in the way he touched me, not in the ferocity or the frequency, but in the rules. He started giving instructions, simple ones at first. Don't call me during the day. Leave the light off when I arrive. Don't ask where I've been. Then they shifted. Don't use my name when we're together. Don't speak unless I ask you to. Don't finish until I say so. And I followed every rule, not because I liked the control, not because I was weak or unsure, but because it gave me something to hold on to, something to believe in, something that made the chaos feel sacred instead of senseless. I began to crave the sound of his commands, the way he moved like he already owned me, the way he held my wrists like they were breakable and beautiful all at once. I stopped seeing myself in the mirror as the version of me I had been. The wife, the designer, the quiet, well-groomed woman with polite eyes and neutral sweaters. Instead, I saw a creature I didn't recognize, hungry, haunted, waiting. My face flushed from touch that left marks, my skin too hot from words I never thought I'd want whispered into my ear. My mind stretched between the craving and the shame I refused to name. And I should have seen it coming. The moment when the fantasy cracked, the mask slipped. The truth began to bleed through the seams. It happened in the strangest place. Not a bed, not a hotel, not even one of the homes we claimed like borrowed theaters. But in an attic, one of my clients had an old summer house outside the city, the kind with crooked floors and dust in the corners and windows that didn't quite close. And we'd gone there under the pretense of checking layout options for new storage, but we both knew why we were really there. The space was empty, cold, echoing. But that didn't stop him. It never did. And when we finished, breathless and shaking and covered in the evidence of what we'd done, he stood to dress and his keyring slipped from his jacket pocket. I reached to pick it up, fingers closing around cool metal, and I froze. There was a keychain I hadn't seen before, or maybe I had and hadn't registered it until now. A small silver pendant, the kind shaped like a half-heart, etched with the word mine in cursive script. It looked familiar, too familiar. And then I knew I'd seen it weeks earlier, sitting on Inga's nightstand beside her earrings and a folded silk scarf, right next to a lipstick the color of blood. I didn't say anything. I just handed it back, smiled as if nothing inside me had shifted, and walked outside into the fading light, with my knees still trembling and my throat closing around the shape of a question I couldn't yet ask. I hadn't planned to be there that day. Not really. It just happened the way so many dangerous things do. Casually, without ceremony. One quiet step leading to another until you're standing in the middle of a moment you can't undo. Inga was out of town. A quick trip to Milan for some kind of collaboration with an architect she admired, and she'd given me a spare key months ago, back when things were different. Back when I still believed we shared something deeper than old wine habits and perfectly rehearsed confessions. I told myself I was dropping off the fabric samples she'd asked for. Nothing more, that I'd be in and out without touching anything that wasn't mine. But that was a lie I told myself before I even turned the key in the door. The house was unnaturally still, like it had been paused mid-thought, with fresh roses somehow still alive in a vase by the window and a half-folded throw blanket slouched across the arm of the couch like it had just been dropped. I set the samples on the kitchen counter and was turning to leave when I noticed her notebook. Not hidden, not locked away, just resting there on the edge of the dining table like it had been waiting for me. A soft leather cover, no title, no clasp. Just there, open by a sliver, revealing the edge of a handwritten page. I shouldn't have touched it. I knew that before my fingers even brushed the cover. But my hand moved anyway, as if it belonged to someone else. As if the version of me who respected boundaries had already left the building. I opened it to the first visible page and read a single date, written neatly in Inga's looping script. April 10th. Vera turned when he walked past. She's ready. My heart gave a strange pull in my chest, a quick jolt that didn't feel like fear or recognition, but something colder and sharper and much harder to name. I turned another page, April 12th. Balcony kiss. She'll initiate. Let him follow. She needs to believe she chose it. I didn't move. My breath slowed until I wasn't sure if I was breathing at all. Line after line, page after page, the truth unfolded like a script. My script. A deliberate mapping of every step I'd taken, every thought I thought was mine. Every moment I had believed was spontaneous and reckless and beautiful. She had written it all before it happened. April 17th. She'll stop pretending she doesn't need it. Oleg should start giving rules by next week. She'll obey. She always obeys when she's desperate. My knees went soft and I had to grip the back of the chair just to stay standing because nothing in the room felt solid anymore. Not the floor beneath me. Not the memories in my head. Not the version of myself I thought I'd been clinging to. It wasn't just betrayal. It was something more intricate, more calculated, like I'd been seduced into a performance I hadn't even auditioned for. And as I kept reading, my hands shaking, I found the entry that finally made sense of everything and destroyed it all in the same breath. March 28th. Igor called. Same voice, same lies. He'll regret it. She'll be my retribution. I'll let her taste what he gave me, and then I'll take it away. He'll watch her unravel. The words blurred, not from tears exactly, but from the sudden clarity that struck so violently I thought I might be sick. Igor, my husband, her former lover. The reason for all of this. The root. The target. I wasn't the goal. I was the weapon, and Oleg. I didn't know anymore what he was. A pawn? A partner? A man who had kissed me like he wanted to burn everything down? Or someone who had simply learned how to follow her cues? I sat down hard, the notebook still in my lap, my pulse pounding in my ears so loud I could barely hear myself think. I felt the shame first, crawling up the back of my neck like a fever. Then the panic, then the worst of it. The ache. Not just the emotional ache, not the betrayal or humiliation. The physical longing that curled inside me despite everything. The memory of his hands, his voice. The way my body still answered to him even now. Even here, knowing what I knew. It disgusted me, and it thrilled me, and it broke me open because I didn't know which part was louder. I stood slowly, walked down the hall as if drawn by some thread I couldn't cut, and entered the bedroom. Hers, their shared bed, the stage where I now knew my lines had likely been rehearsed and recorded and studied. I didn't know what I was looking for until I saw it. A small black device tucked discreetly near the top of the armoire, the lens barely visible unless you were looking for it. I walked over, stared at it for a long moment, and then remembered that first night. How urgent it had been, how undeniable. How he hadn't even turned off the lamp. How he'd whispered things I'd never heard before and made me say them back. I remembered the way he held me afterward. And now, I wondered who else had seen it. Who else had been part of that night? Even silently. Invisibly, I didn't touch the camera, I didn't scream, I just turned and walked out. My whole body shaking from the weight of what I couldn't yet speak aloud, I left the notebook on the table right where I found it, and stepped out into the sunlight that now felt too bright, too sharp, too fake to be real. The drive home felt endless. The streets looked the same, the houses, the trees, all of it untouched, still breathing, still calm, while I unraveled at the seams with every mile. When I pulled into the driveway, I could already see him through the window. Igor, standing in the kitchen, glass in hand, back straight, as if he'd been waiting. I stepped inside without a word. He didn't look up right away, didn't say anything, just took a slow sip and placed the glass on the counter with deliberate care. Then he turned to me, eyes calm, voice quiet. "You were at Inga's," he said. It wasn't a question. I froze, unsure of whether to deny it. Confess? Collapse. But it didn't matter. He reached into the drawer behind him and slid a folder across the counter. Inside, printouts, screenshots, message logs, dates, proof. "We'll start with the divorce," he said, with the same tone he used when reviewing legal contracts, clear and cold and unshakably final. And in that moment, as my life split into before and after, I realized I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt relief. He didn't raise his voice, not once. Not even when he handed me the final papers and set them on the table between us like a contract left unsigned too long. He didn't accuse or dramatize or ask why. Maybe because he already knew, or maybe because knowing wasn't the point anymore. And as I stood in the kitchen that still smelled like our life, the silence between us pulsed louder than any scream, settling into my body with a weight I didn't try to shake. I signed the papers with a steady hand that didn't feel like mine, the pen dragging across the page in slow, quiet strokes, and when I looked up, he was already gone. The front door still open behind him like the house itself hadn't yet figured out how to close around the shape he used to fill. There was no scene, no broken plates or slammed drawers or desperate apologies gasping for air. Only the sound of his car pulling away down the drive, the low hum of the refrigerator kicking on in the background, and the unmistakable sensation that something had ended in such absolute stillness it almost didn't feel real. My chest didn't tighten. My throat didn't close. My eyes didn't fill. Instead, there was only this strange clarity, as if the ache I'd been carrying for years had finally finished its work and stepped aside, making room for something not softer but simpler. I found the notebook on the bed a week later. No note attached. No explanation. Just the pages waiting for me in the same place he used to sleep. I knew it was from him before I even touched it. The charcoal dust smudged on the edge, the weight of it in my hand. And when I opened it, I wasn't surprised to see myself staring back from every sketch. Some were fast and unfinished, just outlines and gestures, my arms folded, my back turned, my hair half pinned the way I always wore it when I didn't know who I was trying to be that day. Others were closer. My mouth parted, my legs curled beneath me. The tension in my shoulders caught so precisely it felt like a mirror that had been paying better attention than I ever did. And then the last one, on the final page, done with care so quiet I could almost hear his breath while he drew it, was just me, lying still, bare, no tattoos, no rings, no distractions, just skin and lines and silence. It wasn't erotic, it wasn't flattering, but it was true. And I sat with that page for longer than I care to admit. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Not anymore. And that was the most startling thing of all. I stayed in the house, at least for a while. Maybe because I wasn't ready to leave, or maybe because I needed to say goodbye to everything piece by piece. I walked the rooms in socks and silence, touching walls, brushing door frames, sitting in chairs we'd once laughed in, cried in, avoided each other in, trying to feel the echoes one last time before they faded. I opened drawers and found ticket stubs, notes, An earring I thought I'd lost years ago, each object holding a version of me I no longer recognized. And I didn't cry for her either. I just nodded to the shadows and moved on. When I reached the bedroom, I opened the bottom drawer of the dresser and pulled out the set I hadn't touched since the night it all began. The dark lace, the thin straps, the bra that didn't hide anything, the panties that barely covered what mattered. And I put them on slowly, not like I was preparing for anything, not like I was mourning or celebrating or seeking approval, but like I was putting my skin back on after years of living in someone else's. I stood in front of the mirror and let myself see. Every mark, every angle, every story etched into the curves and lines I used to cover or explain away. And I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. I was just there. All of me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The flash drive sat in the drawer beside the bed, still wrapped in the velvet pouch she'd once used for jewelry, and I held it in my palm for several long seconds before walking to the fireplace. I didn't hesitate. I lit the flame, dropped the drive into the fire, and watched it blister and melt and blacken without regret or ceremony. Just the quiet acceptance of something that no longer needed to exist. I didn't need to know what was on it anymore. Not the footage, not the audio, not the secrets. Because whatever it was, it didn't own me now. It never really did. I kept only one thing. The sketch, the final one, folded gently and slid into the back of a book I'd already read too many times to count. It was the only piece that felt real, the only thing not tainted by manipulation or power or shame. It was me the way I remembered being, just before I let someone touch me in a way that would change the direction of everything that came after. People told me once, long before all this, that infidelity is about destruction, that it tears through trust and safety and turns love to ash. And they weren't wrong, but what they never said, what they maybe didn't understand, was that sometimes destruction isn't the end. Sometimes it's the match that lights the truth. Sometimes betrayal is just the name we give to freedom when it finally arrives wearing the wrong clothes. And maybe it cost me everything. But I'm awake now, and I'm ready to pay.